Good morning, fellow treasure hunters and explorers. Today I want to do an update video about Forrest Fenn, the Forrest Fenn treasure. It's been a while since the treasure was found. It was found in the summer, supposedly, of 2020. I have reason to believe that it was actually found in the fall of 2019. Anyway, I just want to go through the poem and show the solve of the Forrest Fenn treasure poem. I know with absolute certainty where the treasure was found, and I'm going to do an update video in the spring and the summer, step by step through, and take you to the location, to the actual location where the treasure was found, and show you all the clues along the way and the final destination where Forrest Fenn hid his treasure. And there's a reason that I know where he hid his treasure. And one of the reasons that I know where he hid his treasure is because Forrest hid not only his treasure box, but he hid additional things along with that treasure box in that area. And the finder of the treasure box failed to find those other things. And I suspect the reason that he didn't find those other things is because he didn't have a metal detector with him when he was there. And the other reason that I know who the treasure hunter is because of forensic evidence. The treasure hunter left behind his camp. He left everything behind when he found the treasure, and he was so excited he left everything behind and just took the treasure and left. And he never went back and cleaned up his campsite. And in his campsite there were things that led to the positive identification of the individual that found the treasure. Now, I have some friends in some three-letter agencies that have helped me, so I have a little bit of insider help with that forensic information. But I have no doubt that we have positively identified that the treasure finder was there and that that was the location. On top of this, as I have mentioned in other videos, I had trail cameras in the area since 2016. So for 3 years prior to the treasure hunter finding the treasure, I had trail cameras in there for my own personal reasons, to monitor, to see if there were other people looking in the same area that I was, and to see what was going on. And no matter what your feelings are about this, you know, I've been in the military, I've been in surveillance, and so that's kind of my nature. I wanted to know what's going on. I wanted to know if anybody else was looking in that area and what was going on. And the information that I have actually could open up a big can of worms for the treasure finder. I don't really want to go there. I'd prefer that he just come right out and tell where he found the treasure and not have me tell you all these details. But apparently he's remaining mum about it, and I think the reason he is because there are some sinister things that went on that allowed him to be able to locate the treasure. He was a Johnny-come-lately on the treasure scene. How do I know? Because I went to the Fenn Bury. I went to all the different activities. I was involved on the internet. I met Forrest Fenn. I met a lot of these individuals that were involved in the chase, and he wasn't one of them until the last couple years of the chase. When Forrest asked him about the clues, he couldn't even mention what the clues were in the poem. So this lets me know, and everybody else know, that he got some information from a means or a method that helped him. He didn't solve the clues one at a time in the order in which Forrest gave them. He wasn't familiar with all the little details and clues that Forrest gave along the way. And I'm going to show you from the very beginning of the poem to the very end of the poem, and every single clue that Forrest Fenn gave is in this location. And statistically speaking, it would be impossible for the treasure to be in any other location. I'm also going to tell you about something right here that I want you to know and understand, and that is the big clue, my big epiphany, the big breakthrough with me that I was in the right location came when Forrest made the announcement. He was being interviewed by the media, and they were begging him for an additional clue. And he was asked, "What is the blaze?" Now this is a pretty big clue. What is the blaze? And Forrest gave an explanation that just blew my mind. He said a blaze could be a blaze on a mountainside. It could be a blaze from an old forest fire, or it could be a blaze on a tree. And then he paused and he said, or it could be all three. Boom. A light went off in my head and I realized how Forrest laid out his poem, how he did things, so that no one could twist or manipulate his poem. Every single clue in his poem is 3 clues in one. So every single clue was 3 clues in one. There's a verse in the Bible that says, in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses shall every word be established. I'm sure Forrest was familiar with this. He was very well read. He liked a joke and he liked a twist. He had a very good sense of humor, but he liked a good twist on things. And he said, like he said when he was told, his dad told him, when he had that experience when he told the teacher what his dad had said about her and made a big to-do, he said his father told him, tell the truth, but don't tell all the truth. In other words, you don't have to volunteer information beyond the standard answer to the question. You don't have to go into the details about it. And so pretty much that was the way his poem and the way he ran this treasure chase and this poem is there were little twists along the way that were plays on words and plays on, you know, little sayings and quotes that he involved in his poem, and I'm going to kind of go through some of these things. But it is my belief that every single one of his clues in his poem was 2 or 3 clues in one. Now I haven't been able to identify all 3 clues in every single one, but in most of them I can come up with 3. And in the rest I can come up with at least 2 positive, very positive clues that identify the location as you're going through the poem, taking you step by step right to the location. And then on top of that, all the other clues that he gave along the way, and there were many of them, along with there were many more clues that were in the books, both books, and in other writings that he referred to in his podcasts and the media interviews and different things. And he also gave some clues at the Fenn bereave, you know, if you went and attended those things, those functions where Fenn was, he gave a few little clues to people that if you knew the general location, you could see those clues that he was just talking to people and they didn't even know it was a clue. He also gave clues to people in their private emails, but he did it in a way in which they would not know it was a clue unless they had done their homework and knew the general location or were on the right track. And how do I know that? Because I emailed Forrest Fenn numerous times. And it wasn't until I got very close to the treasure and he quit emailing me back. Once I identified the location, I never heard another word from Forrest. He went silent. And before, he was very talkative, very upbeat, very, you know, in fact, I was one of the reasons, I know I was one of the people, because he wrote me in the email and he said, I was the first person to my knowledge that he said, do not go in an old mine. Because I emailed him and I told him my location and I said, that old mine has collapsed or is partially collapsed. He emailed me back and said, do not go in an old mine. It is not in an old mine. And then within a week, he came right out and told the rest of the public, he said, do not go in an old mine. It's not in a super dangerous, not in a dangerous location. Don't go in an old mine or an old cave. And he was worried about people's safety. And now, the location that I was looking, the final destination, was there a mine nearby? Absolutely. And I'll get into that a little bit later. And I think that's one of the reasons he was concerned about it, is he knew there were some dangers and hazards close by to his final destination, and he didn't want anybody to get hurt, even though people, no matter what you do, people in their exuberance, in their desire to find and solve the treasure, they're going to do some crazy things no matter what you tell them. And Forrest over and over again said, don't go where an 80-year-old man wouldn't go, where it's not safe, where it's not, where you're going to get killed, where you have high risk. And now, the final destination, was there a high risk? It was steep, it was very high up, it was around 10,000 feet. There was a cliff nearby, very close by, so you could fall off or you could get hurt if you were stupid. But if you stayed on the route and went up to that location, it's fairly safe. Just like life is a dangerous thing. I mean, actually the most dangerous thing about the chase was getting in your car and dodging traffic, and during certain times of the year you could have the rainy season, flash floods, you could have, and he told people again, do not go in the wintertime. The search is a seasonal thing, and that's a big clue. People didn't catch on to that, but you go back through his words and his interviews, and he told people over and over again, when winter gets here, rest for the season and go back out once the snow is gone. He told people that over and over again, particularly when the snowmobilers went out and got hypothermia and one of them died. He came out again and he said, do not go out in the wintertime for this treasure. That was a big clue. It's a seasonal search, which tells you that treasure was above snow line. It was in an area where you could only get in the summer, in the spring, and the early fall. During the winter, the treasure hunt was over. That was another big clue to me. I recognized immediately when he said that. He said the treasure's between 5,000 feet and 10,200 feet. Why 10,200 feet? That was a huge clue for me. I should have picked up on that clue. If I would have picked up on that clue on my last trip, well, I did pick up on it on my last trip. That's when I discovered the Finder's Camp, but that was too late. If I'd have picked up on that clue in 2018, I would have found the treasure. Because once I got to the 10,000 foot elevation mark in that area, I went right to the location that the treasure was hidden. It didn't take me long to find it. Now, let's start from the beginning of the clues. I'm going to read the poem directly out of the book, and I'm going to go through the clues one at a time. I'm going to show you the 2 or 3 solid reasons that those are the clues that lock it into position in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. In the explanation that Forrest gave, that the blaze could be a blaze on the mountainside, it could be a old forest fire blaze, or it could be a blaze on a tree, or it could be all 3. That is the pattern that he established, and that is what I'm going to go through and show you how each clue is 3 clues in one. Now, when Forrest announced that he had hid the treasure, this book, The Thrill of the Chase, had been created. When Forrest announced his treasure hunt, he had already written this book. This book was written and published by Forrest Fenn. So he wrote this book, and this date on this is the 11th printing. So he printed quite a few of these. And it's hard to find a date on this. I think it's in the last 2010. So this book came out in 2010 when he announced the treasure hunt. And if you look on the last page, you see the 2 omegas right here that play into this in a significant way in one of the clues that he gave later, and I'm going to talk about that in the book Too Far to Walk, which came about later in the hunt. Towards the end of the book, you can find the poem that is the significant part of this entire book, which basically starts the treasure hunt. And we're going past some interesting things right here, these bronze bottles and figurines that he created. And that's going to play into one of the reasons how I absolutely know where the location of the treasure being found was at. I might have found one of these. I might have found one of these that had some information inside of it. Okay. On page 132. Page 132, here is the poem. And he's got a map. He's got a map right here that plays into this in the Too Far to Walk book. That's a huge clue that he gave. We'll talk about here in a little bit. He starts his poem. As I have gone alone in there, and with my treasure bold, I can keep a secret where, and hint of riches, new and old. Begin it where warm waters halt, and take it in the canyon down. Not far, but too far to walk. Put in below the home of Brown. From there it is no place for the meek. The end is ever drawing nigh. There'll be no paddle up your creek, just heavy loads and waters high. If you've been wise and found the blaze, look quickly down your quest to cease. But tarry scant with marvel gaze. Just take the chest and go in peace. So why is it that I must go and leave my trove for all to seek? The answers I already know. I've done it tired and now I'm weak. So hear me all and listen good. Your effort will be worth the cold. If you are brave and in the wood, I give you title to the gold. It's a pretty well written poem. I'm a poet myself. I've written a couple of anthologies of poetry. This poem was very well put together. It flows, has good rhythm, good rhyme, and it has a lot of riddles included in it. Now I want to start with the poem and just kind of go through my initial beginning of it, and I want to tell a very simple yet profound way in which I came to the general location of where to begin this poem. I did something so dumb, stupid, so blatantly crazy that I don't know if anybody else thought about this or not, but 2010, if you think about what was going on in 2010, computers were a big thing, the internet was a big thing, social media was just starting to come in strong. I mean, it's nowhere near what it was today, but it was, AI was being talked about and mentioned a little bit, artificial intelligence. But the big thing was Google search. And I was born and raised in a time period where Apple computers were just barely coming onto the scene, and we learned how to play little games and make little computer programs and stuff when I was in high school, but nothing like the kids today. I mean, you know, computers were used to type up an essay and to proofread your essay and then print it out. You know, that was great. You didn't have to sit there and put your paper in the typewriter and roll the thing and do this and then go back and push the correct all that would white out your mistakes. And, you know, I mean, it was a big thing. You'd type an essay and then you'd have to go through and retype it sometimes to get it just right. And it was a real chore. But here, this computer, you could print the whole thing, spell check the mistakes, go through, move things around, and then print it out when you're done. It was amazing. That was the level that I was at with computers when I was in school. But with Google search, you know, in my logic, I just said, well, I'm going to go through here, through this poem, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 paragraphs, and I'm going to find what I think are the clues from each of these paragraphs, write them on a piece of paper. I'm going to get on Google, and I'm going to type all the clues, comma, cold, treasure, too far to walk, home of Brown, all these things that I think are clues in here with a comma, in one huge search bar on Google Earth, or on Google. And I pushed return, and the little flower or whatever it is, it's turning and it's turning and it's turning, and the computer's brain is heating up and smoking, because I got like 20 search words in there. And my computer's not the fastest thing in the world back then, and all of a sudden, boom, it comes up, and 3 pages. 3 pages of information. And the first 2 pages, the title at the very top was Pagosa Springs, East Fork of the San Juan, M.O. Brown. I'll talk about who M.O. Brown is later. High water, seasonal travel, 4-wheel drive club of Pagosa Springs, the river crossings, gold and silver found in Summitville, the old town of Elwood, Treasure Falls, Montezuma Mountain, Treasure Mountain, True North. All these key words, the Continental Divide. All these things were in the first 2 pages of the search results of my mass clue dump that I did on Google. How could I look anywhere else? The computer told me that Pagosa Springs was the place to start. It also told me that another good place to start looking was up the East Fork of the San Juan River, which at the headwaters was where Crater Creek and Elwood came in there. And my wife, when I was talking to her and telling her about the poem and my thing, she goes, well, Elwood, that's Spanish for the wood. Elwood, E-L Wood. You could play that on words, and Forrest often did that. She says that could be Elwood, the old town of Elwood, the old mine of Elwood. She says that could be the wood. Well, I was like, in the wood? Wow. So that kind of took me into that area near where I ended up, my final destination. So in the first 10 minutes of my reading this poem, plugging all the clues into Google and pushing search, I was at Elwood. So anybody that feels absolutely stupid or absolutely frustrated that they didn't find the treasure, it should be me, because in 2011 or 12, I don't remember the exact year, I was on to the treasure. I might have heard about Forrest Fenn in 2010. I don't remember if I read the poem then, but it wasn't until 2011 or 12 I started getting involved and that I did my search and started saying, hey, maybe I can search, maybe I can come up with an answer here. And that is the only place I have ever gone, that location, that general area, vicinity from Pagosa Springs up to Elwood and up to Summitville in that area. Treasure Mountain, Montezuma Peak, Treasure Falls, Crater Creek, Elwood Creek, the old town of Elwood, the old mine of Elwood. The story of M.O. Brown making her trek down from a very treacherous trek down from the town of Elwood to Pagosa Springs in the wintertime. The David O. Brown residence, which just happens to be right next to the turnoff that takes you up there. The creek filled with brown trout, and the creek where the trapper Meeks trapped in one of the journals. The The 3 water crossings, which says you're going to cross high water. There'll be no paddle up your creek. You're not paddling up a creek, you're driving beside the creek, but you got to cross the water several times. It's at 10,000 feet. You can't get up there most years until June. You're right at the Continental Divide. You're right in line with Forrest Fenn's house. True north runs right through there, and if you drew a line from Forrest Fenn's house true north, it's going to cross right over the top of the treasure, 10,000 feet. There's a lot of interesting clues. Okay, as I have gone alone in there and with my treasures bold, I can keep my secret where and hint of riches new and old. Okay, so the clue in the first paragraph is he can keep his secret, his treasure, where there's a hint of riches new and old. Well, we know what the new treasure was. The new treasure was Forrest Fenn's treasures that he placed there. That was the hint of new treasure. What's the hint of old treasure? Well, it can only be a few things, right? It has to be an old mine, an old gold or silver mine. It has to be a creek, a river, or a stream that contains gold or silver. And he reaffirms that clue down lower in the poem when he says, heavy loads and waters high. He's playing into the load because of the treasure's weight, but he's playing into the loaded water, which anybody that's in mining, exploration, or prospecting knows that water that has heavy loads contains gold and silver, heavy minerals, heavy loads. A load claim is a mining claim. And to find the mining claim, you're following the gold and the silver up to its source. And so we have to have gold or silver or an old treasure myth or an old treasure story or something. That's the hint of riches new and old. What's that? Has to be an old treasure story, an old treasure location, an old mine, or a place where there's gold or silver found. That's plain and simple, cut and dried. And indeed, the location at Elwood, up the East Fork of the San Juan, there is a mine. It's called the Old Elwood Mine. It's, I think now, or the most recent name after Elwood was called the Black Diamond Mine. But there is a mine there with many shafts and audits, and don't go in them because they're extremely dangerous, and I already have been in them and had some close calls because, you know, human nature. And that's when I emailed Forrest and he said, don't go in the mine. Don't go in there. It's not in a mine. It's not an issue. Don't go where it's dangerous. And then he told everybody else. Well, so, is this location, what are the 3 clues in one? Well, you have an old gold mine at Elwood, very near the location. You have Crater Creek coming down from Montezuma Mountain. Everybody knows the story of Montezuma and Aztec gold, Montezuma Mountain. That's Crater Creek. Coming down from Elwood Creek is Old Summitville, one of the richest mines in Colorado history. You can look up the history of Summitville and the gold that was found there. And the gold that was found at Summitville, consequently, was probably related to a hop, skip, and a jump over here to the story of the French and Treasure Mountain. So Treasure Mountain is here, Summitville here, Montezuma Peak here, and Treasure Falls down here. There's a reason for those names. There's a reason for Montezuma Mountain, a reason for Summitville's gold mine, Elwood's gold mine, Treasure Mountain and the French treasure, which I'm sure they got it from Summitville deposit, and then Treasure Falls. All these names and these things completely surround this location. A hint of riches new and old. Yeah, gold and silver in the water. You have a gold mine right there. You have a gold mine above it. You have treasure stories. Boom, 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 boom. At least 3 different treasure stories with Montezuma Mountain, Summitville, and Treasure Mountain. I don't know the background or story at Treasure Falls, but it's a very beautiful place, and there is gold coming down out of there in small quantities. Microscopic, very small particles. That's why they call it Treasure Falls. That surrounds the location. Let's go to the next paragraph. Begin at where warm waters halt and take it in the canyon down. Not far, but too far to walk. Put in below the home of Brown. Well, obviously this stanza has 3 clues in it. Okay, so the first one had 1 clue in there. For sure, 1 clue. But the next one's a very important paragraph. It has 3 clues. Begin at where warm waters halt. Okay, warm waters halting is a curious phrase, a curious word. If you type in where warm waters halt, very high in the search return, at least back in 2011, very high in the search return is going to be the state of New Mexico's fishing regulations, because Forrest was a very avid fly fisherman, very avid. And that's why one of the reasons he chose this area. I'm going to talk to you about that in a minute. But in the fishing regulations, the state of New Mexico has a very curious clause that talks about where warm waters halt. And it's talking about the fisheries. It's talking about where the warm water fish begin and where the cold water trout begin. You've got the warm water fish, you've got the carp, you've got the bass, you've got the bluegill, you've got some of the more sensitive, warmer water trout, like a brown trout can tolerate warmer waters than a rainbow trout or a cutthroat trout. Okay, so there's a differentiation of where these species of fish prefer to live, and so they had different meanings in those regulations about their limit, the size of the fish you could keep, because the cold water fisheries are always a little more sensitive than the warm water fisheries. Okay, so that's 1 clue of the 3 in 1 with the warm waters halt, the New Mexico fishing regulations. So in my mind, a big clue is warm waters actually halt at the border of Arizona, or at the border of New Mexico and Colorado, or any other state, because that's where the fishing regulations stop and a new state's fishing regulations takes over. So that's actually a location where that proclamation halts, is right at the New Mexico-Colorado border. That's a big thing because Pagosa Springs is very close to the New Mexico-Colorado border. It halts. Those proclamation regulations halt right there. The next clue is right there at Pagosa Springs, right at the border. There just happens to be an anomaly, a very strange anomaly. There's a hot springs there. Not just any hot springs, but it's one of the few, very few hot springs. If you look at many of the different hot springs that exist, very, very few. I think you can count it on maybe 1 hand, other than right in and around Yellowstone. On 1 hand, the number of hot springs that crop up in the middle of a cold water river. Okay, there's not very many of them. If you look in the search area that Forrest Fenn gave us of New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana, New Mexico, Colorado, there's only 2 that I'm aware of. Now there may be 1 more. I'm not certain of if it comes into the cold and the warm water, because I haven't been there and haven't researched it. Now you get it in around Yellowstone, the Firehole River, and a lot of those, there are several. But below Wyoming and Montana, the only 2 that I know of that fit the description of where warm waters halt, where cold waters are coming and then warm waters come and then they halt and it becomes cold water again, is Pagosa. The closest one to where Forrest lived was Pagosa Springs, and the next one is Glenwood Springs. And I did look at Glenwood Springs pretty hard. But the clues that were in the poem just weren't there like they were around Pagosa and the East Fork. There were some clues there, but nothing matched. Nothing matched in order. The names, the clues just didn't come together at Glenwood Springs. And I didn't really look in Wyoming and Montana for various reasons, but the first one of the things that really at the beginning of this played into it, when Forrest told us that this location was where he planned to go to die. This is where he planned to go to die. Okay, he was going to take his treasure with him. He was going to put it in there. He was going to crawl in there. You know, he found out he had cancer. He was going to crawl in there with his last breath or with his last bit of strength, and he was going to stay there until he died. That was going to be his resting place, and with his treasure bold. And so I assumed two things. Maybe I shouldn't have assumed it, but it ended up proving to be right. Both of those things I assumed proved to be right. Number one, he wasn't going to put it in the far reaches of the search area like northern Wyoming or Montana. And why? Why wouldn't he want it all the way up there if that was where he was going to go to die? What if he was in the hospital in a bed from an emergency or something, or he fell, or he was sick and the doctors took him, he was in there and he woke up and and the doctor said, "You got 3 days to live." And don't think this didn't go through Forrest's mind, because he was adamant that what he was going to do. What if he had only a little bit of time to live and he's hooked up with tubes in his arms and he's in a bathrobe or in a nightgown in the hospital? And Forrest goes, heck no, I'm not going to die here. I'm going to my location. So he crawls out of bed when none of the nurses are around. He puts his clothes on, or puts a shawl, or grabs a blanket off the bed and wraps it around himself and sneaks out of the hospital in the dead of night. And, manages somehow to get to his trusty Jeep, and he has to be within a short or fairly short distance from where he's at if he's going to get there and he's in rough shape. So to me, the search area was always close to his home. And the second reason, and two other clues that I felt strongly about from the very beginning, was that not only was it going to be fairly close to his home so that he could get there with his last breath if he needed to, but because he's going to keep his treasure close. I don't know if you know anything about wealthy people or people that have something that's very dear to them. I mean, let's think of the movie, what's it called? The Lord of the Rings. And think about, it's not a perfect example, obviously, because Gollum would never part willingly with the ring, but Forrest Fenn parted grudgingly with his treasure for various reasons. But you can bet your bottom dollar that Forrest wanted that treasure where he could kind of keep an eye on it, kind of know where it was, and if he needed to, he could actually check on it, or if something happened, he could get in there and get it out. Okay? He didn't want to have to climb into an airplane and fly 1,000 miles and rent a car or do all these things. He wanted to be able to jump in his trusty Jeep with his last strength, get to the general location, within a couple of clicks, be able to hike up there with his last strength and collapse in with his treasure. Okay, so those are important things to consider. And I did. And then the last thing that you need to consider is that if you could pick your place to die, your end, your final resting place, are you going to pick a swamp? Are you going to pick some little hellhole in some thorny thicket? Are you going to pick, a place in an old dump or junkyard or someplace that's not appealing? When you look at Forrest Fenn in his life, he was a flyboy. He was a pilot. in Vietnam. He liked to be up in the air, in the high places, in places where you could see and scenery. You can bet being a pilot had some influence on that. But my major in college was anthropology. And several times over the years, I've found significant historical or significant Native American grave sites. Okay, so while we were doing surveying and different things, I found some significant historical grave sites. And I know they were important people, medicine men or chiefs or high esteemed tribal members. And you know where these burials were located? They weren't down on the flats. They weren't down low. They weren't down in some ravine or some little cave down, I mean, some civilizations and societies did that. But you know where they were at? They were up on the highest point of a mountain overlooking the most grand, spectacular scenery that you could ever imagine. That's where these Native American chiefs and medicine men were buried. They were buried where the eastern rising sun would come across their gravesite, where the Creator, the great Creator's light every morning would rise and shine on their grave, and this beautiful expanse of the entire universe almost, where they lived and where they lived and they grew up and they finally died. They were laid to rest where they could overlook their kingdom, their place that they ruled or where they lived, and see its expanse below, beneath them. And that's where I believe that Forrest Fenn's final resting place would be. When I learned that he wanted to cast himself into this location, his final resting place, I knew it was going to be up high with spectacular scenery below him, where he could be a part of the universe. And he talked about this in a couple different places, where if he died, he thought about, one of the things he thought about was having his ashes scattered over the mountains. That was later, after he got over his cancer, and I'm sure that was his wishes later, was to be scattered over this. And there was a place in New Mexico where he talks about that his ashes were going to be scattered, and I'm sure that happened. And so he said he wanted to be a part of the mountains and the stream and the elk and the deer and all of nature. And so there's no better place to be part of that than up there where you can survey it, where you can see it with your last dying breath, the beautiful expanse below. So those are the three things that I thought about. I thought, he's going to keep his treasure fairly close, because if he had to get there with his last breath, he could get there. He wanted to keep it where he could keep an eye on it, and he wanted to be in a very spectacular location. Forrest was not an average, ordinary person. Everything he did was over the top, and that would have been a fitting location for Forrest, and that's where the treasure was hidden. Okay, so that's the first clue in the second paragraph. Begin at where warm waters halt and take it in the canyon down, and that is right at the border of Colorado and New Mexico at Pagosa Springs. That's where the warm waters halt from the hot springs that's there. That's where the fishing regulations of New Mexico halts, and it's also where the literal hot springs halts. A lot of these areas, like you'll find the hot springs that'll come out of the ground here and here and here and here. It's not like that at Pagosa. It's the hot springs and then it's gone, and the warm waters are done, and it's taken in the canyon down. It's taken from Colorado in the canyon down into New Mexico. Not far, but too far to walk. Okay, that's the second clue in the second paragraph. Not far, but too far to walk. Okay, in one of the extra, I'm going to see if I can find what I did with the cheat sheet. Maybe I Maybe I put it somewhere else. I thought I kept it in the book here. All the other clues that Forrest gave. Too far to walk. I'm going to pause the video for a minute while I find it. Okay, I found this list of some of the additional clues, and there's a whole bunch of them, but there's even more than this if you really know and knew Forrest and kind of knew the area. Okay, he talked about in a couple of different places how too far to walk was at least 8.25 miles north of Santa Fe, New Mexico. So in one of the books, and then to the media, he said that he defined that too far to walk was at least 8.25 miles north of Santa Fe, New Mexico. You know, and he talked about the time he was with Skippy and they got into an argument and Skippy kicked him out of the car and made him walk, and then he ended up coming back and picking him up later, and Forrest was surprised that he did, knowing Skippy. So he defined that from then, it kind of defined that too far to walk was 8.25 miles was too far to walk. So that was another big clue to me when he came out with that clue, because I started putting 8.25 miles on there, a little bit further than 8.25 miles on there, and I came to an interesting conclusion. From Pagosa Springs to the turnoff of where the home of Brown begins was a little over 8.25 miles. About 8.3 miles was where the turnoff to the East Fork of the San Juan River. So from Pagosa Springs to the turnoff of the East Fork, which is the East Fork of the San Juan, was 8.3 miles. So he defined it as at least 8.25 miles north of Santa Fe, New Mexico. But it ended up being 8.3 miles from where Warm Waters halt to the home of Brown, which is the next clue. There are some other things that I want to discuss with the 8.25 miles north, but it's so you have the clue in the book with Skippy when he was dropped off and he had to walk a long ways, and you have the clue where he says it was more than 8.25 miles north of New Mexico. Well, it was further than 8.25 miles from New Mexico from his home, but it also was exactly almost 8.25, a little bit more, from the border of where Warm Waters halt to the turnoff at the home of Brown. So the next clue that we come to is put in below the home of Brown. Now, put in is a boating term, and so erroneously a lot of people believed you had to float some river or do some things to get to the treasure from water. But he gives us a clue in the next paragraph, and that's the way poetry works. If you're trying to figure out the meaning of a poem, you have to take the poem as a whole, not just one paragraph. You know, you might allude to something to lead people a little bit astray, but then the next paragraph will correct you and confuse you or bring you back on track, and that is put in below the home of Brown. Well, we know it's not a boat, because he says in the next paragraph, there'll be no paddle up your creek. Well, he's telling us two clues right there. He's telling us we're going up a creek, but he's also telling us there'll be no paddle up your creek. So you're not in a boat, but you're going up a creek. So let's jump back to put in below the home of Brown. So we know that put in below the home of Brown, we can surmise, is not a putting in with a boat, but it's a term of begin your journey. Put in is also a English phrase, or an English. I took English in college, and so I love poetry, and so it's a mannerism. It's used. Put in below. Put in. Begin your journey, because you know when the settlers when the pioneers, when they came across the ocean, they put in. When you begin your journey, you put in. So it became a term to represent a journey. Put in. Begin. Put in below the home of Brown. So who's the home of Brown? Well, I had no idea about the home of Brown, but when I did my Google search, 3 prominent things popped up in that exact location right there. There's a very famous person, David Brown, who was a very wealthy man who owned a lot of property right at the turnoff of the East Fork of the San Juan, which happened to be 8.3 miles north of Pagosa Springs. That popped up in that search, David Brown residence. David Brown, he was, an interesting thing about David Brown was he had money, he was also an art. He enjoyed art, and as you know, Forrest Fenn sold art. Forrest Fenn had an art gallery. That's how he made his living in the latter part of his life. He became a very wealthy man because of his art galleries and his store there, the old Santa Fe Trading Post. So I'm sure he knew David Brown, whether through business, through art, or just because he was a wealthy landowner up in this beautiful area where this road took off on this very historically significant path, this historically significant road. One of the last roads created in the continental United States. It was of significance. But in my search on Google, there was a very significant individual that popped up, a historical significant person, and I believe this is the person that is related to the home of Brown. But as I mentioned earlier, every clue is 3 clues in one, so Forrest giggling was probably like, well, there's M.O. Brown, there's David Brown here, and M.O. Brown made a historically significant trek in the dead of winter from the town of Elwood down to Pagosa Springs, and it made it into the newspaper. It was anybody that knew that route and how steep and treacherous and snow covered and icy water and crossing the road and the steep area and the terrain, the snow was probably up over your knees or deeper, and it was a historical significant moment that made the newspaper, that made the news at that time. M.O. Brown was a woman, and she made that trek in the wintertime with her young son, and it was an event that was immortalized at the time because of its significance. So I believe the home of Brown, and that popped up in that Google search that I did, one of the top things on the list was the story of M.O. Brown's trek to Pagosa Springs in the dead of winter from Elwood. And you can look that up, do a word search and look it up. Very interesting story. So I believe the home of Brown was the home of M.O. Brown, who came from Elwood. So that was her home. So you're putting in below, you're turning up the creek, up the river beside the creek that will take you to the home of Brown, below the home of Brown. From there, it is no place for the meek. Well, I can tell you, anybody that's been up that road, it's no place for the meek. It's steep, it's seasonal, it's rough, it's rocky. There's a steep cliff on this side. There's a steep hill on this side. There's sometimes boulders in the road you got to go around or get out of your way. Sometimes you can't even get up there some years. One of the years I went up there, the water was so high, I tried to go across it in my big 3/4 ton Dodge truck, and it kicked me sideways. And thankfully I got traction and was able to back up, and I turned around, found a way to turn around, and I went home, and I didn't come back till later in the summer when the rest of the snow had melted and the water was lower. There'll be no place for the meek. It's a very scary drive up there. And the second part of meek that I have found in my search is that Meeks, the trapper, trapped that entire region of Colorado. The San Juan Mountains, he was up and down every creek, every stream, and a historically significant area of the San Juan that he trapped was that area. So it was no place for the meek. Now, Forrest did not capitalize Meek, so he could just straightforward be saying that it's a scary place, it's no place for meek people to go. But if you want to look at additional clues that could anchor that, it would be the Joe Meeks, the trapper. The end is ever drawing nigh. So if you've got this high in, if you've got this far in the poem, the end is ever drawing nigh. You're on the right track. You're getting towards where the treasure is hidden. Now finding it's going to be a different story, as I found out, but the end is ever drawing nigh. You're getting close to it. There'll be no paddle up your creek. As I mentioned before, there's no paddle up your creek. You're not in the water. You're driving beside the river. You're driving up the creek. There'll be no paddle up your creek. So you're going up. That's the clue. Up. You're going up the creek, but you're not in it. You're beside it. There'll be no paddle up your creek, just heavy loads and waters high. As I mentioned earlier, heavy loads, people, you're referring to carrying a heavy treasure out. I think somebody come up with the 48 pounds, 52 pounds I've heard. I don't know what the actual, it'd be interesting to know what it actually weighed when it was found. But it's going to be a heavy load to carry it out. But heavy loads in the water's high. So if you're carrying the treasure out, there's high water. You're most likely going to have to cross high water. But the heavy loads also, and I believe this is one of the second clues that anchors it, the heavy loads is mineral-laden water with gold and silver in it. So you're going through water crossings. There's 3 water crossings in the spring that are relatively treacherous that you got to wait for until the snow melt's gone. That's why Forrest said, don't try to get up there in the wintertime. You'll be a search and rescue victim. You got deep snow, and you've got treacherous water crossings, and you've got ice. And so you got to wait, be patient till spring is finally there. Just heavy loads and water's high. So you have high water crossings. If you're going up beside a creek, and he says there'll be no paddle up your creek, but you've got heavy loads and high water. There are 3 high water crossings. There's always water running across that road, 3 different places, and sometimes more in the earlier spring. But 3 that could be treacherous. If you've been wise and found the blaze, okay, so we talked about the blaze earlier. One of the reporters asked Forrest, what's the blaze? And he hesitated for a minute, and then he said, what the heck? I could see it on him, in his eyes. What the heck? And he says, well, a blaze could be a blaze on the mountainside. Well, what's a blaze on the mountainside? It's a bare spot. It's the shape of a bare spot. It could be an old forest fire burn. That's a blaze. Or it could be a blaze on a tree. Well, what's a blaze on a tree? That's where you mark a tree with a marker. You write something on there, you make a blaze mark that's a trail marker. Or he said it could be all 3. And that's, like I said, that's when it dawned on me that all of his clues in his poem were 2 or 3 clues in one, not just a single clue. And that anchors that in spot, anchors that clue in location if your single clue is 2 or 3. So, indeed, when I finally found what the blaze was and found the generalized location at the top, there was a huge blaze on the mountainside on a steep hill in a rock pile, and it's the shape of a blaze. It's very interesting. I don't know if anybody's familiar with blaze marks on trees, trail markers. In the military and Boy Scouts, I've been in both. Where I worked for the Forest Service, we blazed the trees to mark the trail. We'd make rock piles, rock cairns, and we would blaze the trees. And when the trail turned to the right, the blaze is usually two marks, 2 bare spots cut in the tree, a top and a bottom. And when the trail veers to the left, the top blaze mark would move to the left, staggered with the right one, or the middle one. And when the trail would go to the right, the top marker would go to the right. And that means you're proceeding, now you're going to turn. Well, the blaze on the mountainside, that Forrest Fenn, it's like this. It means go right. When you see that blaze on the mountain, it's telling you to go right. And indeed, if you go right, follow the trail to the top, it'll take you right up to where Forrest Fenn's treasure was hidden. Consequently, he also said it could be a blaze on the mountainside. Well, right below, if you climb up on that point and look down, you can see the old forest fire that burned, you know, probably 20 acres down below. All the trees are charred, they're dead, they're down. It's a big bare spot. You can see that forest fire blaze from up on that view. You can see where the old forest fire was. And if you get to the parking area where he parked, and he said, you know, it's not more than a few miles to where from there, and I did it both trips in a day, you know, it's less than a few miles. If you get to that parking spot where he would have parked, where he's talking about that location, there's a big blaze on the tree. You know what it says there? It's a historically significant blaze. It's been written about. It was in that Pagosa Springs Google search, or in that Google search I did. It was one of the top things on the list. What was it? It said, the old blaze tree, the old pioneer blaze tree at Elwood that takes you to the Continental Divide and to Summitville. The old historical blazed tree that has Elwood written on it, that tells you where to go to get to Summitville and the Continental Divide. So that's the blazed tree that you park at. Anybody that drives that road is going to see that old historical blazed tree that was written by pioneers to tell people which fork to go, because if you take the right fork, you're going to go up Crater Creek up to Montezuma Mountain. But the trail goes up the left fork up Elwood Creek up to Summitville. So that tree, that blazed tree that says Elwood on it, is telling you where to go. That's the blazed tree that he's talking about. And down below is the blazed forest fire, and up on the mountain is the blaze on the mountainside. At another point in Forrest Fenn's clues, his additional clues from the cheat sheet, he talks about the end of his trail, his treasure's trail, and is the end of his rainbow. Talks about the end of his rainbow as one of the clues. The end of his rainbow. He doesn't really say it's a clue, but he makes that statement. When my dad was with me that day, and we first got up there, and the first time we laid eyes on the blaze, we looked at it, and we were dead silent for a good 20-30 seconds, and then we just looked at each other, and we both pointed, my dad and me at the same time. There's the blaze. There's the blaze. It's literally in the shape of a Forest Service blaze, and it's rainbow colored. It's red, yellow, blue, orange, and green. The rocks are heavily mineralized, multicolored. That's what when Forrest said the end of my rainbow, because at the top of that rainbow is where Forrest Fenn's intended last resting place was located. You've been wise and found the blaze. Look quickly down, your quest to cease. So that's telling you, and I should have caught on to it, and I didn't, because in the back of my mind, both my dad and I, we had this thing in our head, don't go where an 80-year-old man would go. The riddle there is, don't go where 80-year-old Forrest Fenn wouldn't go. And my dad, who was with me, was nearly 80 years old, and he was in great shape, and he went everywhere I went. He went to the top of the mountain over here, the top of the mountain here. We just didn't get to the point where we needed to at that time. But my dad was 80 years old. So when Forrest said, don't go where an 80-year-old man couldn't go, it was a trick. Don't go where a good, in shape 80-year-old man like Forrest at that time, or pardon me, I'm not used to talking this much, or my dad, who's in very good shape and couldn't go. So not your average 80-year-old man, but that's the little bit of a trick. Okay. So I should have taken this clue right here. Look quickly down, your quest to cease. That's telling you go to the top. Go to the top. But tarry scant with marvel gaze. The other clue in here about look quickly down your quest to cease is the 10,000. He says the treasure is located above 5,000 feet and below 10,200 feet. Why 10,200 feet? I mean, the fireworks should be going off in your head. It's a seasonal search. Don't go out in the wintertime. It's between 5,000 feet and 10,200 feet, but you can't get there in the wintertime. Well, a lot of places most places in New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana, you can get there at 5,000 feet in the wintertime, but you sure can't get to 10,200 feet in the wintertime. So boom, that should have been a huge clue. It went right over most people's head. Go to the top. So when I finally got to the top and found the treasure was gone, I looked on Google Earth later and I saw that the trail that went over the top, the old game trail that took you all the way around there, was 10,200 feet. So it was below the game trail at the top of the mountain. If I'd have went up the game trail, got up to the trail up there, and looked below, I would have found it within a few hours, like I eventually did. Look quickly down, your quest to cease. But tarry scant with marvel gaze. Boom. Tarry scant with marvel gaze. What's that phrase? It says, do not tarry very long with a marvelous gaze. It's telling you there's a hell of a view. There's a hell of a beautiful view there below you. Don't sit there in dumbfounded stupor staring at the marvelous gaze below you. Take the chest and go in peace. So go up there where you can see this beautiful grandeur, this spectacular scenery below you, but don't sit there and dwell on it. Look for the chest. Take the chest and go in peace. That whole paragraph is telling you, get up high, that's where it's at. But don't gaze too long. Just go look for the chest, take it, and go in peace. Well, there's another little clue that I mentioned. Forrest mentions it. He mentions it in the book Too Far to Walk. He talks about a leashed chipmunk. I mean, this should have been a huge, fireworks moment for people too, when he names an animal by its name. I mean, he doesn't do that very often. He'll talk about a buffalo or he'll talk about an elk. He doesn't say a Rocky Mountain elk. He doesn't say, American bison or a pronghorn antelope or a mule deer or a white-tailed deer. He says, but in this phrase, he's talking about the beautiful area in which the treasure was at, and he says, a leashed chipmunk. And if you go in to Audubon or the Western field guides of these animals and look up a leashed chipmunk, you know what it says, where they live? They live next to the pika in a rock pile near a creek. That's where they live. They live next to a rock pile where its neighbor is the pika, which is a little thing that lives on lichen in the rocks. It's like a little lemming or a little hamster. They're very cute. In fact, this area of this blaze is loaded with pikas and leashed chipmunks. So if you look up a leashed chipmunk, it tells you where they live, and they live in a rock pile beside a creek. And that's precisely where we're ended up here. So the scant, tarry scant with marvel gaze, he uses that word scant, which has several different meanings. But one of the meanings of scant is tarry quickly. So don't sit there very long and look at the beautiful scenery. Just take the chest and go in peace. But the other meaning to scant is a chunk of rock. It's a masonry term of the masons would take a scant and shape it for their building purposes. The masons or the the Knights Templar, they would take a scant of rocks and turn it into a building block, a stone. This whole mountainside is nothing but a scant of rocks. Okay, so that's how, that's one of the clues. Scant. It's a bunch of rocks. So it's going to be near a bunch of rocks. And indeed, this whole mountainside is boulders from, some of them are the size of a refrigerator. Most of them are the size of a divan or a coffee table or smaller. There's literally millions of them on this mineralized, blaze-shaped formation on the mountain. And below the area where Forrest hid his treasure. So just take the chest and go in peace. So why is it that I must go and leave my trove for all to seek? The answers I already know. I've done it tired and now I'm weak. So he was tired because he hid the treasure. It took him 2 trips, less than a few miles. So less than a few miles is 2 miles, right? A few is 3. So less than a few miles is 2 miles. So it had to be like a half mile each trip to keep it underneath 3 miles. And precisely from the Elwood Creek blaze, the Elwood blaze at the parking area, to where he hid his treasure is approximately a half mile. So he did up and back twice. So he went 2 miles, and it's kind of rough, but he could do it. My dad could do it. He would have been tired at the end of the day. I've done it tired and now I'm weak. Why is he tired and weak? Because he hiked up there with a heavy chest and its treasure. In the next paragraph, the final one, he says, "So hear me all and listen good. Your effort will be worth the cold. If you are brave and in the wood, I give you title to the gold." So your effort, it's going to take effort. If you are brave and in the wood, brave and in the wood. What's that mean, brave and in the wood? Why do you have to be brave? Because it's a steep, rough climb, and you've got to cross over a creek that's up almost to your waist. To get there, it's brutally cold. Your effort will be worth the cold. Well, if it's in the middle of the summer and you're hiking up a hill, or hiking anywhere, you're not going to be cold. So obviously you've got to do something to get cold, and the most logical explanation is you got wet in cold water. And indeed, when you go from the crossing, the parking spot at the tree blaze, and you cross Crater Creek, it comes out of Montezuma Mountain, between Montezuma Mountain and the next mountain over to the south, and it is cold. I think it's a small glacier. I don't think the snow ever melts in some of those crevices and cracks up there, and that water comes right out. It's brutally cold year round, believe me. I crossed it many times. Your effort will be worth the cold. If you are brave and in the wood, well, what's brave? Brave is obvious, you got to be brave to get up there. It's no place for the meek. Visually kind of scary. If you're brave and in the wood, in the woods, it's not capitalized. It's not a really, it's not a person by the name of Wood, we don't think. Not like the home of Brown. The home of Brown is capitalized, so we know it's a proper noun. He does give us that clue. But in this, in the wood, well, my wife came up with the clue when I got to the location, was looking around and saw Elwood, and I, wood, Elwood, wood, Elwood. I ding, my wife says, well, E-L, wood, L, in Spanish is the, and wood could mean the wood. In a comical Forrest Fenn type of way, Elwood could mean the wood, in the wood. Well, indeed, you are basically in the old town. You're very close to the old town of Elwood that's no longer there. Remember, Forrest said it's not near any town or city anymore. Well, obviously it's not, because the whole town of Elwood, that old mining town, got washed away in a huge flash flood, washed the whole thing away, and there's not a sign of it left there anymore. The only signs of any human activity or habitation is the old mine holes and the few old things left there from the mining operation. And so, but you are in the wood. Indeed, you are in, not only does Elwood Creek comes down, but you're near the old town of Elwood that's gone now. And you're also in a, when you get to where the treasure was, you're in the woods. You're in a wooded area. It's above the blaze. It's up in a beautiful little foxhole in the ground. Where Forrest Fenn was going to take his last breath is in a little foxhole in the ground. It's about, you stand up in there, you look out about from your chest to your top of your head. If you're shorter, you're going to be peeping over, but it's a foxhole in the ground right on the edge of a cliff with a beautiful vast view below you. You can see the whole thing, and the blaze is directly below you. I forgot about, in the earlier one, I wanted to give a clue. If you are wise, I just glanced over that. Okay, if you've been wise and found the blaze. So the blaze, that was a sneaky one that he put in there, wise. A lot of people talked about wise. You know, a lot of people talked about what's wise. Well, the first thing that comes to mind probably is an owl. For some reason, owls have been, you know, the library symbol. Owls are wise or smart. They sit there silently and turn their heads looking, and you know, silent people are considered to be wise. The owls become the symbol for being wise. Well, when I finally got to the right location and found the foxhole and was blown away by the location and the beauty and the serenity of it, and I was like, okay, this is the spot, I know it is. I looked to my left down below, and lo and behold, a very unique and unusual formation comes up out of the ground. It's probably 50 feet tall, 40 or 50 feet tall, and it's a huge hard rock foundation of metamorphic stone, and at the very top of the perch, it's like a big old tree. It's huge, gnarly looking rock formation. At the very top of this tree is the most beautifully shaped owl figure you will ever see in natural setting in nature. You look at that, and everybody that looks at it is going to say that's a hawk or an owl. They're not going to say, oh, look at the birds, or look at the dog sitting up there, or look at this or that. They're going to say, oh, look at the hawk or the owl. They're going to eagle, hawk, owl. That's a bird sitting on top of its perch. So, and I'll show some pictures in the video of that. That's a magnificent. He makes the illusion to being wise, and I believe that has to do with the owl-shaped formation. It's just spectacular. You can't miss it when you're in the right area. It's amazing. So we're in the last paragraph. So hear me all and listen good. Your effort will be worth the cold, crossing the water. And significantly, he talks about in his book and in his stories, and when he was in Vietnam, about the waterfall, about the beautiful valley that he landed in, and the gravestones that he found. Well, right down there is a grave, the cemetery for Elwood. A lot of people died in that flood. And there's 3 big waterfalls on Crater Creek, and 4 or 5 waterfalls, big spectacular waterfalls on Elwood Creek, where they come together. And where they come together, they form the headwaters of the East Fork of the San Juan River. The East Fork of the San Juan River is a gold water trout fishery. It's one of the most spectacular, and I believe it's only open to fly fishing. It's not, I don't believe it's open to angling unless they've changed their regulations. It's fly fishing only. You know, artificial flies and lures only. But it is a beautiful stream. I believe it's one of the first ones that Forrest Fenn ever fished with his father, and I believe it was one of his favorite, and it happened to be close to his home where he could go fishing. That's probably how he discovered this area. Maybe he discovered it from the air, maybe he saw the blaze from the air because it'd stand out like a sore thumb. Maybe the area intrigued him, maybe he went there fishing, I don't know, but somehow he came into this area. Your effort will be worth the cold. If you are brave and in the wood, if you're brave and in this Elwood, the wood, I give you title to the gold. My problem when I went there with my father was I always had very limited time in which I could search. I didn't have unlimited time. I was always between jobs, between this project and that project. On a weekend, I only had a day or two. I never camped in the area. I should have camped right there and spent 3 or 4 days and really looked the area over. I give credit to the finder. He camped there. I know he did because I found his camp. I got his photo on my trail cameras. He told everyone in a statement that he had only searched in one area and that it was up near Yellowstone. Yet here I got his photo on a trail camera in the very area that I'm looking for the treasure, and I found his camp where he left forensic evidence. He left receipts. He left food. He left a brand of cigarettes that he smokes. He left a brand of beer that he drinks. He left the type of candy that he likes, the type of food that he eats. He left some tools, some camping equipment, all tied back to the person that found the treasure. So I know it was him. On top of that, I have additional clues. I'm not going to talk. I talked a little bit about that at the beginning of this video. I'm not going to talk any more about it. I want to save that for the reveal video when I show what I found and what was left at the site that the treasure hunter who found the treasure missed. He obviously didn't have a metal detector, or if he did, he didn't look very good because there were some additional things that identified the location positively that were left there by Forrest. And I may or may not share that with people, I don't know. I'm going to think long and hard about it. But I don't think it's fair that the finder found the treasure and did not give the treasure searching community the location. The area is remote. It's hard to get to. It takes a 4-wheel drive high clearance vehicle. There's, the search location was actually quite limited to people. If they really knew where the location was, there'd probably been a lot of outrage that Forrest was sending them to this hard to get to area that you couldn't get to in the winter. But it was a very beautiful, adventurous location, and the searcher, even if he got some inside information, he would have had to have looked long and hard to be able to find it, or got really lucky. But if I had went to the top of the mountain and begun my search there, like the clues we talked about in here meant, I would have found it in probably 2017. Me and my dad were there then. We went to the top of another mountain around from there, and we didn't go up there. My dad kept saying, well, don't go where an 80-year-old man go. And I would say, Dad, look where you're standing. He goes, yeah, I can get there, but I'm not a normal 80-year-old man. I said, neither was Forrest. He was in great shape up until his last few years, and he got real feeble. He beat cancer. He beat it, and then he put his treasure there. And so there was a lot of other clues. I mean, I could go through this cheat sheet one at a time. Every single clue that's talked about could be found right here. Located 5,000 feet, above 5,000 feet and below 10,200, at least 8.25 miles north of Santa Fe, New Mexico. Not in a graveyard. That doesn't mean there might not be a graveyard somewhere nearby. Not in an outhouse. Not associated with a structure. There's no structures around. Where warm waters halt is not a dam. Well, Pagosa Springs is not a dam. Chest and contents weigh 42 pounds. Fenn said 44 in one email, but he has said 42 pounds several other times. The chest is 10 by 10 by 5 inches made of bronze. Forrest published a map in his book, Too Far to Walk, and he told us the chest was hidden somewhere on that map. Well, let's go over that real quick. Here's the fold-out map of the location. You can also see the two omegas. I always took that to be a clue. He never would say what that meant. But he had a reason to put the two omegas, and I surmised that it had something to do with the map. So I started looking on the map, and lo and behold, I found The only clue, and I need my glasses to be able to see it because it's printed small. Okay, I don't know why it took me long because I've looked at this 1,000 times. But if you look on the map at the bottom, right near the border of New Mexico and Arizona, and you look at, and it says San Juan Mountains. So, San Juan Mountains. The U, in my opinion, the U in San Juan represents an upside down omega. It's got a little squiggly on there, and to me that is possibly one of the clues. Well, that U in San Juan just happens to be the exact location, the very exact location of Elwood and of the blaze and of where the treasure was hidden. But the most interesting thing about this map, if you look at it, is that this map is actually in the shape of a blaze. That's the exact shape of a blaze. Remember when Forrest was talking about riding a bicycle backwards? If you take this blaze shape map in this book and reverse it backwards, like riding a bicycle backwards, if you turn it backwards, it becomes the blaze. It's the exact shape of the blaze. You ever wonder why he made this map this shape? It's because this map backwards is the exact representation of the blaze. And if this map is the exact representation of the blaze, you'll know where to look for the treasure. Once you figure that out. You look at the map carefully, and you'll figure that out. Well, the other interesting thing about this map that we haven't talked about before is you look at these degrees. It shows you the degrees and the parallel. Right here, the 8th parallel right there, right in here, that's a continental divide. And Forrest mentioned that in a couple of different areas. He gave one of the clues as the continental divide. He also talked about true north. I'm going to leave that up to you to do some research. I'm not going to tell you everything. So he published a map in his book, and the chest is hidden somewhere on that map. So the map is the blaze. The map is in the shape of the blaze backwards. The treasure is in one of 4 states: Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, or New Mexico. It's not associated with a structure. It means there's no buildings, outhouses. There's no, houses or buildings. Indeed, there's no structures, either new or old, within a quarter mile of where the final location was. Seasonal search. Since it's above 5,000 feet, the search area will be impacted by snow. As the elevation increases, the search season decreases. Well, he said up to 10,200 feet for a reason. It was at his location was right at 10,000 feet, and as I mentioned, the trail that you went on to get up there was 10,200 feet. Fenn said there are 9 clues in the poem. Start at the beginning. You start at Pagosa Springs and you work your way up. You turn at the East Fork of San Juan and you end up at the blaze. Will the poem lead to the treasure? Yes, if you know where to start. The clues are in consecutive order. Don't mess with the poem. Some folks correctly mentioned the first 2 clues to me in an email, then they went right past the other 7, not knowing they had been so close. People have been within 500 feet of the treasure. Some searchers would have been within 500 feet, I know. How would he know that? Well, I know how. Because if they told Forrest they went to the old mine, they would have been within 500 feet of the treasure. Some searchers have been within 200 feet. Well, that 200 feet ties into the 10,200 feet. Because if you walked on the trail above the treasure, you would have been within 200 feet of the treasure. He never said it was buried. Okay, so it wasn't buried. It would have been just sitting on the ground or under a little shelf there in his foxhole. person who finds a treasure will have studied the poem over and over and thought and analyzed and moved with confidence. Nothing about it will be accidental. Unless you got some insider's information some way, whether nefarious or by some other treasure hunter who put a lot of time and effort slipping up. I said on the Today Show that the treasure is not associated with any structure. Some people say I have desire to mislead. This is not true. There are no notes to be found or safety deposit boxes to be searched. The clues can lead you to the treasure and it will be there waiting when you arrive. Are there clues in the Too Far to Walk book? Or the Thrill of the Chase book? Yes, because the poem is in the book. Are there clues in the Thrill of the Chase book? Yes, because the map is in the book. Are there subtle hints in the Thrill of the Chase book? Yes, if you can recognize them. All the information you need to find the treasure is in the poem. The chapters in my book have very subtle hints but are not deliberately placed to aid the seeker. Good luck in the search. I want to talk about that. In the Thrill of the Chase book, Forrest has a picture of when he crashed his airplane and had to be rescued. He shows a rock face and where the helicopter had to come to pick him up and where the pilot landed, and it shows a rocky crop formation. Well, that picture in that book, if you compare it on Google Earth to this location to that picture that's drawn in the book, they're nearly identical. Where he landed would have been where his location was. Where he was picked up would have been at the base of the blaze. And you look at that, if you know the location, the area, look on Google Earth, they're identical in structure and in the way they look. So if he gave a big clue, people, I don't know if they picked up on that, anybody, but were both trips made on the same day? I made 2 trips from my car to the hiding place and it was done in one afternoon. Are you willing to say whether the place of the treasure chest is the same one where you had previously plotted to have your bones rest forever? Yes, it is, said Forrest. Is the blaze one single object? In a word, yes. Well, the blaze is a huge blaze on a mountainside. But there are other blazes nearby. Playing a hunch is not worth much in the search. Those who start out by looking for the blaze are wasting their time. Well, yeah, it's like a needle in a haystack. If you don't start at the right location and work your way there. I would like to know if the blaze can be found during the day without a flashlight. I would say yes. Well, when me and my dad saw the blaze, it was like, you know, dun dun dun. It was spectacular. Did the same 9 clues exist when you were a kid, and to your estimate, will they still exist in 100 years and 1,000 years? The clues did not exist when I was a kid, but most of the places the clues referred to did. I think they might still exist in 100 years, but the geography probably will change before we reach the next millennia. Well, there's a big rock slide or earthquake or forest fire, then the geography could change. Okay, these aren't all the clues. There are many more, but I'm going to save the rest of them for my final video on Forrest Fenn. This summer I'm going to take you to the location. I'm going to take you to where the chest was, and I'm going to maybe show you what it was there, what I found. I've already posted pictures of the finder. I've already posted pictures of the stuff he left behind his camp. I may talk about the forensic evidence that I have. Had some individuals help me verify the forensic evidence. And so I'm very confident that I know where the treasure was found, and I'd like to share it with the other treasure hunters out there. I think they need closure. I think it's only fair. Thanks for watching. Hope you have a great day.